And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, gentle listeners. I'm your host, Pat Flynn, joined by my pretty frequent co host, Dr. Jim Madden. And we've been working on some stuff together, and we've had some big announcements too. In fact,
Yeah.
let's get right to it, man. We're going to talk about the problem of evil, by the way, but we have to mention Jim's new book. It is officially out. Dr. Madden, please tell us about this new project and where people can snag a copy of that.
Thinking about thinking, mind and meaning in the era of technological nihilism. It's a tract on philosophy of mind and philosophy of technology. You will find it at Amazon. It's probably your best bet. You can also find it in the Whiff and Stock under Cascade.
Nice.
Under Veritas series, their website, but you can get it primed to yourself on Amazon. Please do that because just in fairness to the people who published it, right?
I don't want them to go bankrupt, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's like like academic books are basically the publishers are doing the academic a service, right?
Yeah.
And so please help my friends at Cascade.
Yeah.
Keep the lights on.
That is an honest and honorable petition. I feel the same way about my book. Like, I think I can fairly say that neither of us are writing these books to pay the mortgage, right? Money. We're writing these books because we're passionate. We think we have something that of interest and valuable to say.
Yep.
And in a sense, the publishers, they take risks on us, right? Real monetary risks. So yeah, please do support these projects. Please do go grab a copy of the book real quick. Just give us the highlights. Like, what can people expect to find in the pages of Thinking About Thinking?
Sure. You'll get a framing of what I take to be kind of the fundamental relationship between technology and nihilism and why that relates to how we think about mind, right? You'll get basically a chapter arguing against reductionism and arguing against internalism about mind, right?
Ooh.
Yeah, and then you'll get a chapter on the grounding of mind in world in the phenomenological sense, right? Nice. So it's kind of spelling out the conditions of the externalism that I argued for in the first chapter.
Yeah, very cool.
Then you get a chapter on freedom. Okay, sort of what freedom looks like once you've made this turn, right? Then you get a chapter on artificial intelligence, all right, and then finally you get a chapter on the interrelation between technology and nihilism, and what I see is like what would it be to go forward from there.
Nice, man. You're hitting all the hot topics. I love it. I have not read it yet, but I absolutely am going to. So I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. So this is like
it's done. Finally.
This is it. You're done with philosophy of mind now, right? Just wipe my hands of it, right?
Yeah. No. I always say that, but no, I'm not. But
you always drag back in, man. I know the feeling, right? Well, that's great. Awesome to get.
I've also said that about philosophy of religion over times too, and here we are. Right?
And here we are. So, are we allowed to kind of tease what we've been working on that front and what prompted this?
Well, I think so. Yeah. So,
Go ahead. Well, go ahead. You give the background, and
we'll just. Pat and I are working on a paper for it'll be in a collection of essays on animal suffering for Palgrave. Mm-hmm. And I think it'll be out next year sometime. So we'll keep everybody posted on the progress of the volume, right? Mm-hmm. Our paper nears completion on that. Yeah. And this paper is basically a follow-up on a paper that I published in 2021 now, I think it is, on inductive problems of evil and inductive atheology and animal suffering, right? So
right. Mm-hmm.
or the problem of suffering in general. So so it's a follow-up piece on that, but we're expanding out quite a bit in this one. So
yeah. So just a little bit more background, and then we'll talk about what this episode is about. Is that Jim's thought obviously has inspired me in many ways, but I took various thoughts of yours and used them even in my own my own book, my own theodicy. And then we kind of just started brainstorming and thinking further, and now here we are, and we hope to actually write a sequel or follow up to this paper to
demands it actually.
To kind of like, and I think that we're really trying to show that the conversation must move forward to a different consideration when it comes to the problem of evil, what we're calling the problem of failure. But we're not gonna get too far ahead of ourselves. What we really want to go ahead, Jim.
Failure sounds like the problem of losers, right?
Yeah. Story of my life, brother.
I'm the people live in trailers.
Yeah. By the way, dude, we did have another instance of failure. I'm sorry to report that another dog at my dad's house has suddenly passed away.
Really?
Yeah. My dad's house is full of dogs. They're all very old. So rest in peace, Dexter.
So,
You will be missed, right?
speaking of failure, inevitable failure, Bob the Chameleon is
Yeah.
mentioned throughout this book.
Oh, good. Well, you know
As
what?
as I wrote most of the book, Bob was still at a point of near flourishing.
And
Right?
and who says that immortality is not for the
Yeah.
birds?
And actually, in the epilogue, I talk about how, however, however grand Bob's colors become, whatever rapturous acts of chameleon reproduction that he engages in, he's still going to go down.
Yeah,
He's still going to fail. So the problem with
dude.
failure comes up in this
I
book.
I
And
love,
Bob has since failed. Right.
dude. I mean, this is what I love about it is just how it's all just absolutely, wonderfully, low class, wrapped in sophistication.
Yes.
I'm all about it. Like, look, Dexter, great dog, lived a long, good life, died swiftly. But Julie calls me, my stepmom. She's like, yeah, Dexter's dead. Like, this people. You might want to fast forward through this, but I got to tell Jim the story because this is just
Yeah.
how it goes here. It's
That
just
was
like
so good.
she's like, he collapsed and a little tinkle came out of his wee wee, and and like as soon as you say that to me, like how am I supposed to react, right? And like,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
but get this, that isn't the end of the story, right? She's like, and I because apparently I didn't know this, he had just been collapsing and passing out like for weeks now, and just like I had no idea. He's a very old dog, very old dog. And then so she nudged him or kicked him because she thought it was just another one of his episodes, right? And he did get up and he pranced around for like 2 more hours, just joyful as all could be, and then collapsed again, and that was it. And it was
Next year, we hardly knew you.
So
he went out happy though.
yeah, so you know what? Great dog. You know, will be missed. Had a very good doggy life. So this is not a time. We're on the cusp of Thanksgiving. It's a time for gratitude and celebrations.
It's what Dexter would want.
It really is, though, right? It really is, right? Okay, now what we're going to do in seriousness is, so we were working on this paper together and we were over word counts. We actually had to cut a fair bit, but the section we cut was like really great because it was Jim
actually being a book.
Yeah, because what you did, because you wrote the first draft and then I got it, is the first section was just
Can I time out there for the young people?
Yeah, for sure.
Young people, scholars, budding scholars watch this. My advice to you is anytime you're going to do a co-written piece, have one person write a complete draft and then send it to the other person.
You have to do it. Yep.
It's the only way to do it.
No, absolutely. If you just like, I'll write a little bit, you write, no. Somebody has to write the full draft, you send it, and then you do your full set of revisions back and forth. If you do it well, it should just like pass it back and forth 2, maybe 3 times, and you should be good to go, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, it's a hot mess. So always just somebody just man up, a woman up, write the paper and send it to the colleague.
Yeah, and I also think this, and you've done this more than me, but I also think it's a good idea, like generally, that like when you ask somebody to co-author, if you're the one, like you kind of have like most of it there, and you're reaching out to somebody that can like fill a gap or two. You know what I mean? Not like, oh, I got like 20% in of idea, maybe you've got another 20%. Let's try and build it. That's gonna be a total mess, right? Yeah. So those are good practical tips. Okay, so anyways, we cut a section that was really you just giving a great overview and kind of history of the wider conversation around the problem of evil. So we thought, hey, this might be kind of like a cool episode, just educational. We're not trying to solve the debate or end a discussion, but just kind of for the purposes of this program, which is Philosophy for the People, to kind of just give a general overview. What is the problem of evil? How has the conversation evolved over, the past several decades? Because it really has quite significantly. And I thought that would be cool. And I think what you're going to do is you're probably going to take what we cut and put on your Substack, right? At some point.
At some point, yeah. I'll put it up there. Or I'll do something, put on my website or my Substack or something. Because I do think it's a useful taxonomy, right?
And that's what we're going to do.
And working through that helped us figure out a big picture for ourselves. So, yeah. So I'm sure most of the listeners, viewers will know this, but we'll begin at the beginning, as it were, right?
Let's do it.
So what is the problem of evil? Well, the problem of evil is to say somehow the occurrence, in some sense of occurrence, right? That would become difficult. The occurrence of bad things, evils, right? In some sense of evils, we'll get into that, is inconsistent with the existence of God, all right? wherein we mean by God the God of classical theism, right? And there's a lot we can say about the God of classical theism, but relevant to this, typically, correct me on this, Pat, is, it's a perfectly powerful, a perfectly good, and a perfectly knowing, all-knowing God, right? And the idea is, if God is perfectly powerful, then there's no evil that it would be beyond his power to correct if he were to know about it and want to do it, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, if God is omniscient, perfectly knowing, well, then it would seem there would be no evil, right? That would occur that he wouldn't know about it, right? Like no one's hiding the evil behind their back that God doesn't know about it, right? And then finally, if he's perfectly,
doesn't mean they don't try.
yeah, I mean, we've all tried that one, right? And if he's perfectly good, then it would seem any evil that he knows about and could prevent, he would prevent,
Right.
He would not want any evil to occur, and there's nothing to stop him from doing what he wants because he's all powerful. Then the case would be then that there shouldn't be any evil at all. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And most classically, right, like you can find that argument in the ancient world, right?
Yep.
And it's generally, in at least early on, it's taken to be a logical problem to say like the occurrence of any evil at all is logically inconsistent with the occurrence of the deity of classical theism, right?
Yeah, right. And most of the atheologians you think of, like Mackey, will say, well, the contradiction isn't like immediately apparent. But if we bring in some, Mackey talks about quasi-logical rules, right? Something like additional principles that the good is always opposed to evil in such a way that a good thing always eliminates evil as far as it can, right? Something along those lines. And there's no limits to what an omnipotent being can do. That's sort of one of the famous formulations, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I like to put it this way: is like given omnipotence, there's nothing he couldn't prevent, supposedly, right? Given omniscience, he would know about anything that occurs, and given perfect goodness, he would want to remove any evil that he knows about, and since he could, he would, right? So there's the problem, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay,
And on its face, like, hey, that sounds pretty darn strong, right?
Darn
Yeah.
strong. Yeah, I mean, like it's reason why it's
nobody's sneezing at it, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The central issue in natural theology in philosophy religion for a couple thousand years now, right?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So and then the natural progression on it is, well, the theist will say, well, hey, wait, don't we think sometimes morally virtuous humans allow evils to occur, right, when they have sufficiently good reasons for doing so? Okay. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that, well, a perfectly good agent could bring about states of affairs that have evils as consequences if indeed they have sufficiently good reasons for doing so, right? Mm-hmm. A moral justification for it, right?
Right.
Classic example is, like it's bad that your children has pain, and your child has pain, is like quasi traumatized by getting a shot, right, the vaccine, but it's good for them not to get the polio, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you'd say, yeah, there's an evil consequence of a child being frightened and scared and not knowing what's going on, but that consequence is not what you're not doing it because you're into hurting your kid. That would be wrong, right? Okay. You're doing it because there's this other good thing that will come from it, the prevention of the polio, right? Okay. So then the idea then is, why couldn't we think of God's relation to creation that way, right? That he has to administer certain vaccines, as it were, that scare and traumatize us, but only to achieve some greater good, right?
Yeah, right. Or to avoid some worser fate,
or avert some worse evil. Yeah, like polio, like is more as averting an evil more than getting a good, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so then typically like the most common appeal there throughout the history of philosophy is that the only way God could have gotten free will is if he allows us to like go to run amok, right?
Yeah. And if people want to develop a recent example of a free will defense, we did that whole episode on Mark Johnston's really interesting and that paper is relevant because he's responding to a sort of attempt at resuscitating the logical problem of evil from James Sturba. So this is a debate that's, sometimes people say, well, the logical problem of evil is completely dead. It's not completely dead. There's still people out there trying to advance, or resuscitate it. But then, there's, obviously counters and Johnson. So people want like kind of see where the debate currently is at. They might be interested in what episode we did with Johnston, not with Johnston, on Johnston.
Not with, If only, right? Yeah.
Right.
I don't think Johnson's a podcast guy, right?
I don't. Yeah, I don't know. That'd be cool. Real quick,
If you
can I
search
mention?
on YouTube, almost nothing comes up. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what you mentioned is definitely the general approach that theists take, right? They say, hey, wait, there's something hidden here.
Yeah.
We need to be able to know that God couldn't have a reason or set of reasons that are justifying for allowing or permitting the suffering and evil. There are, however, and I think they're at least worth highlighting or mentioning, and then we can just kind of pass on, because there are other theists that just want to, maybe take a stab at different directions at omnipotence or omniscience. And I think generally those are problematic, because then you wind up with something that isn't quite the God of classical theism,
Sure.
right? But there are people who do respond along those lines, and the question is, well, could you do that in such a way that this restricted understanding of omnipotence or omniscience is still compatible with classical theism, right? And in fact, I think there's some plausible ways of doing that, and but that's going to take us down a route of, well, how do you understand omnipotence and omniscience? Because I think, like, some of these kind of like baked in air stipulative, right, notions of omnipotence, omniscience need to be restricted to avoid other paradoxes and stuff anyways, right? Whereas the classical theist sort of arrives at the divine attributes really through a very robust prior metaphysical analysis that they inherently have restricted understandings of omnipotence and omniscience, right? And then the question is, do these more refined notions of omnipotence or omniscience help at all with the problem of evil? And there are some thinkers, some Thomists, that think, yes, actually they do, but that's I don't have surveys on this, but that's probably a minority approach.
I mean,
right?
think of it, like, one of the classic arguments there is, look, if God is going to make something finite, right, things are going to suck for any finite thing at some point.
Right? Yeah, there's just like strictly metaphysical restraints, right? Yeah.
But let's not do that.
Yeah, just like letting people know that there's a lot of ways people have gone with this discussion, right?
And so then the way that so in the beginning, right, you have the problem of evil, right? Okay, and evil is inconsistent with a tricompetent deity. Okay,
right.
But okay, then the next move of the dialectic is say, well, but wait, perfectly morally virtuous people can justify the allowance of evils in order to avoid a greater evil or to bring about a sufficiently good, right? So as long as you can come up with a good that is something that we would take it plausible that God would pursue, that is sufficiently valuable, or an evil that's sufficiently anti-valuable to be avoided, and is sufficiently well connected to the evil that supposedly God is allowing, then it would seem like you've got a justifying good there, right? So I think that, like, the weight of the good, the plausibility of God doing it, the weight of the good or the evil, their corresponding evil, and the connection between the good and the evil, the good to be achieved and the evil to be allowed, right? It's very important to see that those are the three factors that have to go into a justifying good, right?
Yeah, that's good. It's good. You're good at pulling out core ingredients, Professor.
Well, that's just, I learned that at Bill Rowe's knee, right?
Yeah, who's the problem of evil guy, right? Yeah,
who's the guy, yeah. And so then there's two ways the theist can go with that. You can give what's called a theodicy, right? And typically what's meant by a theodicy is to say, we indeed know a good that we would highly expect God to go after, right? And we do think it's very likely that it's sufficiently good and it is sufficiently connected to the evils allowed so as to justify God. Okay, so a theodicy is a very strong claim.
It's a very robust account, right? Of trying to give a very thick sort of narrative that more or less gets God off the hook, right?
And the trick to the theodicy is, okay, anything that the theist appeals to outside of the tricompetence of the God of classical theism, by like taking anything biblical or traditional, or something like that about God, you got a problem here, because now you're making it, you're running the risk of becoming ad hoc, right? You see that. So this is the challenge of theodicy, is like, what would we expect God to do just based on the tricompetent properties?
Right. We're just thinking really hard about the nature of God and like the fundamental principles of classical theism. What can we predict or anticipate from that? And you're right. You know, a lot of people will be like, okay, well, you just brought angels and demons into the mix, but now you're complicating your theory.
Yeah.
But the clever thing, and I actually have a lot of sympathy with this, is like Johnson is like, I didn't complicate my theory. I showed you an entailment of it, right?
Exactly. Okay, now.
But that's all part of the debate, yeah.
The other route to go is not a theodicy, but a defense. Okay. And what a defense is saying, I think Flanagan may have coined this term, but a defense is saying, well, no, we have no strong reason to think God would do this. You just can't rule it out. For all we know, God would be going after this good.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm not saying this is the actual world, but I'm saying it's within the realm of possibility. Right.
Yeah. And so for all we know, this good is sufficiently good, right? For all we know, it's sufficiently connected. Like if what we're arguing against is the logical problem of evil, you just need to show that we don't know there's a contradiction.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And this is obviously a much more modest approach.
More modest, right? And so look, if you end up saying, hey, for all we know, God would pursue free will, and for all we know, he somehow needs to like bring the devil about, right? Okay. And for all we know, the devil would fall, right, as a result of free will, and then now he's let loose the archon to cause cancer, right?
Yep.
Okay. It then seems like you've got not a theodicy, because we have a defense. You're saying you can't rule out theism, and
yes,
it's brilliant because if a theist has some other reasons for being a theist in their back pocket, a proof, properly basic, whatever, right? Agnostic inquiry, my personal favorite. Right. Okay. If they have something else in their back pocket that they can justify their theism with, all they need to do is rule out the claim
that it's not outright absurd. Right. Yeah.
And so so all you need, if you have good reasons for theism, all you need is a good defense. Right.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And I
think that's so important to understand, right? Because otherwise people will totally miss what's going on with the defense. They'll be like, that story sounds totally wild. Why should I ever believe that? But they're not giving you a story to believe theism, right? They're giving you a story to show that there's possibility space here, that itself, takes down the logical problem of evil, so that like theism is still on the table, such that if you already have other independent reasons for being a theist, you don't have to give that position up, right?
And so I think I would refer people to Peter Van Inwagen's book on the problem of evil.
Dude, I was just revisiting that the other day. Yeah, tremendous volume, right?
Yeah, tremendous book, and it lays this out quite a bit. And he's just out to give you a defense.
Yep,
he's a defense guy, right? Okay. So I think if you want a very sophisticated defense in this region, go with Van Inwagen.
Yeah. His and in that defense, you will get his defense applied to animal suffering, divine hiddenness. It's
that's good book.
Yeah, it is really good.
I actually use it in here for other reasons at certain points.
Yeah. I use aspects of his when he for people who are interested in my book, you'll hear me bring up problems of vagueness and arbitrariness. That's from Von Inwagen. That's from totally using it from him, right?
Okay, so now let's suppose whether you think that either theodicy or defense gets you off the hook on the logical problem of evil. Okay. Now, an atheologian will then, and by that I mean here, Bill Rowe, okay, will say, okay, that's fine. I grant to you it is, especially if we're talking defense, right? We can't rule out that this is what God is doing, but I'm going to ask you, how likely is that?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And you'll get now the proposal that there are apparently gratuitous evils abroad in the universe today, right? And by that, what one means is evils for which it is highly unlikely that there could be either a good that is sufficiently weighty to justify their allowance, or that they are so closely connected to such a good that that's the only way that good could be achieved.
Yep.
Okay. And this is generally argued based on either or the intensity of certain evils, or just the overall extent of evil that occurs.
Right. Okay. Like animal suffering through the evolutionary process, stuff like that, right?
It's interesting, and I think we actually even use this in the paper, right? William James does some of this, right? Where okay, let's look at the entire what's emerging as the actual history of the way things have gone down on Earth, right? So you have
Yeah.
animals that mostly suffer for most of their existence.
Right. Just
Going on
brutal. Right. Yeah.
brutally,
Brutal.
yeah, like brutality is like the method of nature now,
Hmm.
right? And you just got, and it's going on for billions of years,
Hmm.
right? And then I think the atheist is right to say, okay, so really
What is
is
this?
all
What
of
is this
that,
possibly serving? Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
like how likely is it that all of that, every lick of that was necessary so that, like, Pat Flynn could like have free will, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that is a fine objection, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
And the crafty thing about, just to go back to Van Inguin, is Van Inguin might say maybe not all of it was necessary. That's kind of the crafty thing
yeah,
about
yeah,
his
exactly.
arbitrary. But
Yeah.
we'll save. There's lots
Yes.
of
Yeah,
details that we can't get
you're right.
into.
That'd
Right.
be a
Yeah.
fun episode to do, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, we should, because that is such a powerful point, and like
Mm.
people should be at least aware of that.
Yeah.
And
So
we'll do something on that in the future. Hmm.
I had a conversation. I was right out of grad school. I was talking to a biologist friend of mine who, he said, like, he brought the scripture about how God takes care of every sparrow, right?
Hmm.
And he pointed out that like 90% of sparrows die before reaching sexual maturity.
Hmm. Hmm.
So like, here's the idea is like, it's easy for us to not notice that, like, every squirrel you see out there running around collecting nuts in your yard right now
Hmm.
is doing that because it's like on the verge of starvation. It's like in horrible
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
It's
Dude,
like,
so not to distract from that poignant point, but there's a white squirrel in our neighborhood. We call him the pale horse of death,
yeah,
appropriately.
watching.
Um,
Yeah,
that thing ain't struggling to survive, man.
yeah, he's doing all right.
Dude, he's doing just
All the other squirrels are starving because of him.
yeah, dude, that's
It's winter
crazy. I never seen a white squirrel before, man.
Yeah,
But,
no,
but yeah, anyways, point being, look, guys, just look around, right? Like, we don't have to,
yeah,
and like, this is not something that, as far as I'm aware, that anybody seriously debates, right? The actual
yeah,
data of the
yeah,
suffering, right?
exactly.
This is, theists
And,
concede it,
and I
it's just right. Yeah. Hmm.
and that's why, and I think that's why you have to have Rose's point there about being sufficiently connected to the good that the defensive strategy proposes, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because you could say, yeah, I mean, like, one might go like Cardinal Newman and say, like, better that the whole world be lost than one human commit a sin, right?
Hmm.
And like say, no, really, free will is such a great good. It's such a great good that it gave a point to all of the process of creation, right? So yeah, indeed, it was worth all the suffering. But then I think Roe is right to come back and say, okay, every single lick of it, it's worth all of it, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
like God couldn't have done it without just maybe 1 million years less of suffering or
Right.
something like that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's important, right? So like, it's that connection to the proposed good.
Right.
That's
Yeah. And
yeah,
I would just say, again, importantly, actually, Vanning would say, well, he probably could have done it that way,
yeah,
right? And he
exactly.
does.
Yeah,
So there are people that will
yeah, the hope.
strongly, yeah, right.
Yeah. And so, and like Rose's examples were of a young. This was a true story. A terrible example of like a
Bambi
young
and Sue,
girl.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, a young girl who was like raped and murdered on Christmas morning, in Detroit, I think is where it was, right? And the other one was just a made up one, but very plausible. A deer dying in a forest fire where there's no one
Yep.
there to like see it, right?
Right.
And so he's in both of those, he's asking us, okay, how are those terrible evils
Right.
really connected to your or my free will,
Yeah.
right?
What reasons do you see? Right?
Yeah,
Could you
yeah,
possibly see?
yeah,
Right? That could justify these. That's the
yeah.
challenge he's offering.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Mhm.
I think, and I think though, typically though, and this is where Roe was brilliant, is the typical theistic strategists say, well, look, here's a good that would be worth it. And Roe's like, yeah, that good may well be worth it, but why? How is that actually connected to these events?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Connect the dots for me. Right. Yeah.
Connect the dots. Yeah. And that to me that's the hard part. Okay,
Yep.
that's the hard part. Okay,
Yep.
so
Yep. Yep.
this becomes then not the
Yeah,
logical.
but and I agree, like, if you're asking me to, like, connect this particular instance of evil, horrendous suffering, to some large scale good, that's hard to draw a line there,
Hard to
right?
know. Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah, right. So the question is, does the theist need to do that, right? Mhm.
yeah. And so this becomes
And
what's
maybe
called.
something, and maybe people can, like, there are, again, accounts out there, where people are directly responding with very robust theodicies, trying to connect, trying to do exactly that, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so this becomes it's called sometimes the inductive problem of evil, the evidential problem of evil.
The
right?
probabilistic problem of evil.
Probabilistic problem of evil. Because like what the atheologian is saying here is like, no, we're not demonstrating that there's no God of classical theism. We're just saying it's really unlikely. It's really unlikely that there's any connection between these particularly apparently gratuitous evils and any known good that God would even plausibly pursue. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I made this clarification. I sent you it before, Jim, because I was thinking, well, maybe this would go in our paper, but then I actually put it on a Substack called "Clarifying the Probabilistic Problem of Evil." Right? Is that at the heart, there's still that fundamental claim between the outright inconsistency between God and unjustified
Yeah.
evils, right?
And gratuity. Yeah. There would be
Yeah.
nothing gratuitous. Yeah.
Yeah, so it really is like in a sense, it does still reduce to there being this logical problem evil, but so it's not. I think sometimes people misunderstand it. It's not that there are gratuitous evils, so
Yeah.
probably God doesn't exist, right? Some people seem to think no, that's definitely not. Like if there are gratuitous evils, then definitely God does not exist, right?
Well,
They are,
leaving aside Van den Wagen vagaries,
yeah,
if God exists, there are no gratuitous evils.
right. But his vagaries still get their justification from general considerations,
Yeah.
higher level
Exactly.
considerations,
Yeah.
right? So that's important. So they are still ultimately justified for
Yes.
Van and Wagen. It's just when you get down to the details, there's a reason for arbitrariness. That's his brilliant move,
The
right? Yeah,
reasons peter out somewhere.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
But they're still not totally ultimately
Yeah.
arbitrary or brute or
There's
anything
good
like that.
reasons for those sorts of things to occur. We just can't assign a reason to each of them individually.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's right. So, anyway, so that was just a little clarification. It's
Yeah.
for
And,
probably there are gratuitous evils, and for that reason, we should lean towards atheism. Is the way.
and then the whole drama of the theodicy and defensive strategies plays out in the probabilistic realm, right? And like Bill Rowe and planning to go at it for a generation over this, right? Okay. But I think for both of us, for our money, the big move then is towards skeptical theism, right?
Mhm.
And skeptical theism, position first innovated by a guy named Steve Weichstra, who I think is still alive and active, actually, right?
As far as I
Yeah.
know.
And I know for most of his career, if not all of it, was at Calvin, right?
Okay.
And Weichstra, maybe at Pittsburgh for a while, but then at Calvin anyway. Weichstra came. The original paper was called on the Humean problem of appearances or something like that. And he said basically Weichstra's strategy to say is the atheist is saying it appears as if God does not exist, right? Like the amount of evil in the world, right, or the intensity distribution of evil in the world appears such that there is nobody running this thing, right? Or there's no good running this thing. Okay. Well, Weichstra basically is posing to the atheologian the question, okay, well, what would it appear for it? How would things appear if God were to exist, right? And he thinks that it's important that the atheist could answer that question because you're saying it appears as if God doesn't exist. Well, he thinks then that it's incumbent on you to say, well, how would it appear if he did exist, right? An example I think is actually in the original paper. He says if I say right now, it does not appear that there's an elephant in the room, right? Well, I should be able to tell you how it would appear if there were one, right?
Yeah, a lot
So if
more
you're saying,
gray.
well,
Right.
it appears as if God is not here. Well, then tell me how would it appear were he here? What would the contrary evidence be, right? Okay. And Weichster then says, well, look, if God exists, we would expect that he would know goods that we don't know, and he would know connections among goods and evils that we don't know.
Yeah.
So he then says there's no reason to think things would look any differently to us than they do whether God does or doesn't exist with respect to the distribution of evils, because for all we know, there's justifying goods that are unavailable to us, right? That God would not, I mean, for all knowing, I think he says we would expect that there would be justifying goods that would be available to God that are not available to us, right? Such that things would not appear any different than they do now if God were to exist.
Right. That it's not just that we, if God exists, that we don't see the reasons. We should expect that we would not, that there would be reasons available that would be encompassed by the divine mind that we should not expect to be captured by beings that are like us, very finite, cognitively limited, and so on and so forth. Right. Yeah.
And so basically, like what Weiss was saying is, yeah, I agree that if God exists, there would be no gratuitous evils, right?
Right.
But he actually thinks that if God exists, there very well would be the appearance of gratuitous evils.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because there would be things that would occur that God can justify that we cannot,
Right.
right?
Call them instead mysterious evils.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, or they would have the appearance of gratuitous evil. They would be apparent gratuitous evils, right?
Yeah. He thinks theism predicts that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so then the fact that there is the appearance of gratuitous evil, right? Is in no way evidence against theism, according to White's, right? In fact, you would expect this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
It definitely and it significantly reshaped the conversation around the problem of evil. We'll get to that next stage. But sometimes there's this analogy I think was first given by Alston, who's following a certain similar path, right? And he says, well, look, because he's trying to draw certain, and there's certain analogies that skeptical theists use that Alston rejects because he thinks they invite problems that aren't necessary. But one of the analogies that he likes, that he thinks is more relevant, is, if I'm playing chess against a chess master, me, Pat Flynn, who knows almost nothing about chess, like I hardly even know the rules, right? And the chess master is making various moves. I'm not going to see any reason behind any of the moves that he's making, right? But just because I don't see a reason does not enable the inference that probably there is no reason, right? So that's the question. Does you not in this instance?
In fact,
right?
if you're playing chess master, the inference should be there probably is.
Yeah, that's right. If I know there's a chess master, same thing, like if I know God exists, and I think Rowe even admits you can just do the Morian shift, right? Like if you know that God exists and you just conclude that there are no gratuitous evils, right? If I know I'm playing against a chess master, then I know there are reasons, even if I can't see them, and given my own limitations, I would not expect to see them, right? So that's kind of just a way to maybe at least draw out the general point.
So and of course there's problems with skeptical theism. Like, some people like Brian Davis is a good example of this. Say, look, doesn't this? It seems like you're asking us to seriously entertain that there could be moral justifications for certain evils that's just unfathomable to us, and thereby it would seem that we really don't know much about goods and evils anymore, right? And thereby there's a kind of a moral skepticism that he thinks that could follow on this. I think it's an important objection, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. You better find a way to be modest enough in your skeptical theism, which has been Olson is somebody who's aware of this, right?
Yes.
That you don't rain in acid, right? Over everything, including if you're into natural. I mean, I guess some people could pay that bullet, right? Because the idea is if you're going to be too skeptical about what you would expect from God or whatever, like, do you just take down the entire project of natural theology in general?
Yeah.
And then you've burned everything down.
Yeah, it's partly what Draper does too, right? Draper says Draper thinks there's a lot to skeptical theism. He says, yeah, you're right. The fact that it appears to us that there's no good behind this does not entail that there is none, right? And it doesn't necessarily make it probable that there is none. Okay, but he also then says he also thinks that you have to be skeptical about what reasons God might have for allowing or for preventing evils, right? Not just allowing them. Right. So it looks like, okay, if you look out there and you say, oh, there's something that's occurring that's not so good, but here's a reason why God would do that. Well, Draper, I think, is saying, well, no, you don't know that now in skeptical theism, right? That like there's, because now you're saying God's ways are so beyond ours, we can't understand anything at all. So it looks like you can't really hook God with the good in the world anymore now either, right?
For sure, right?
Which I think is, I never thought of that before I looked at that paper. Yeah, so
and that's specifically, like, I think of Austin. That's something that he takes up. I think actually has some pretty good responses to that, but I'll let people do reading on their own. And we should mention Davis because he's kind of a unique player in this debate. And his whole approach to the problem of evil is to essentially classify it as one gigantic category mistake.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if we want to talk about that now.
Is to ask God for moral justifications, in his view, is a category mistake.
Right? That's right. You're inferring something, the moral principles, right? That you're using to try and that serve as the link, right, between inferring of the creator some property of failure, essentially from creation. He thinks completely break down when you try to apply that principle across. Really just like vertically rather than horizontally. Like he'll say like these principles apply when we're talking about like beings on the same level of reality, right? Me and Jim, and we share a human nature. So yeah, these principles are relevant for us. But that principle, right, is sort of flowing from the natural law that God himself creates, right?
Right.
And God is no more subject to the natural law than he is the laws of physics, for that matter, right?
Right.
So he's like, everyone in this debate is just hugely confused. I'm not doing the best job articulating Draper's position, but it's essentially that. And he thinks it's just, when we say God is good, we don't mean, this is Draper's very contentious, but I actually think ultimately correct point.
Davis, yes.
He's not Davis. Yeah, he doesn't that God is not a moral agent. God's goodness does not mean God is a moral agent. So he's kind of a unique but very forceful player in this debate who's taking almost a totally different approach, right?
Yeah. And I highly recommend his book on A Courteous on Evil on this point.
Yeah, what is it called again? God and the Reality of Evil, or the Reality of God and the Problem of Evil, something like that.
There's Reality of God and Problem of Evil, and then he has another one, just A Courteous on Evil.
That's right.
I mean, it's St. Thomas Courteous on Evil anyway, but those books are very good. So just to round out the taxonomy then, right? So you've got problem of evil. We can divide it between the probabilistic problem of evil, or the inductive problem of evil, and the logical problem of evil, right? Okay. And note, really, we've only distinguished based on like the strength of the conclusion drawn from it, right? On the logical problem of evil, they would claim to like infer a demonstration, absolute demonstration that God does not exist, right? The inductive problem of evil would be to say, no, it's unreasonable to think God exists, or it's highly unlikely that God exists, right? Something in terms of the taxonomy that we were working on is, now let's divide the problem of evil not based on the strength of the conclusion of the atheological argument, but let's divide it based on what we mean by evil. Okay. And on the one, like you and I distinguish between the problem of suffering on one hand and the problem of failure on the other. Okay. And I think in our view, right, that these are actually two independent problems. Okay. And all we mean by suffering or the problem of suffering is the fact that things hurt. Right.
The felt aspect that we don't like. Right. Yeah.
Whether it be emotional suffering or physical suffering. Right. And so on that view, the atheological argument is saying is there's more bad feels. I don't mean it dismissively to put it that way. There's more pain qualia, right, in the world, or distributed in a way that there could be it's very unlikely that there's a good sufficiently connected to that.
Yep.
The problem of failure is just to say whether or not animals have pleasure or pain in the process. What we mean by failure is they do not measure up to what would be flourishing for their kind. Yeah, they don't have good lives, right?
Right, in like a Aristotelian sense, right?
Yeah, Aristotelian sense, or even a Darwinian sense, right?
Sure.
Whatever you're using to ground the teleology of flourishing, right? And here, so the idea is, like 90% of the sparrows die before they reach sexual maturity, right? Most of the squirrels, are gonna starve to death this winter, and whether or not it hurts them or not, right? There's a question of like, why would there be so much failure?
Right?
Okay, and it does seem like that failure is the norm in the universe in a way, among living things, right? Okay, like why a universe of entropy, right? Okay,
yeah, you just don't like and it seems like Aristotle was pretty hip to this, right?
It's very hip.
Yeah.
Plato's I think you can see. I think Plato's Timaeus is the first treatise ever written on the problem of failure.
Yeah, and that's right. So people want to, I guess, have an interesting perspective on that. We did that episode on the Timaeus where we're like, it's kind of a theodicy here, really, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and so and this like takes us to like what we're working on is, so we're dividing the question between the problem of suffering and the problem of failure, right? And we're showing how the problem of suffering, we think, can rather easily be solved, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we take it, and we contend that the kind of most interesting, relevant and lively aspect of the debate within the problem of evil is kind of coming from Draper.
Yeah.
And the meeting of Draper and skeptical theism, essentially.
Out of that whole dialectical process, like Paul Draper gets spit out of that, right? And
right.
He's the most interesting one to look at now on an atheological argument. Right?
That's right.
So what we do is we take him up on what we're calling the problem of suffering, right? And we look at what his position does on the point of the problem of suffering, and we're going to argue it's unable to make that stick in any way, shape, or form, or it's going to end in I think the way I would put it, maybe you don't, but it's going to end in a tie. right?
Yeah,
It
me and
does,
Jim don't totally agree
yeah,
on the I don't know if we totally disagree either. Maybe we're still just kind of making up our minds on it. But
yeah,
yeah, most modestly, we would say
yeah,
it winds up as a wash, right?
yeah. It's a wash, right? And so then it then becomes a question of the problem of failure, right?
That's right.
And there I think is where things get interesting.
And there's our sequel paper,
Yeah.
right?
And
Yeah.
I actually think, what we've done with the problem of failure is we've just backed our way into the classical definition of evil as
Oh,
creation.
totally.
Yeah.
As Aquinas understood it for
Yeah.
sure, right? Yep.
And Plato
Just
did.
come full circle, baby, right?
Yeah. And Plato did, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, people are gonna have to wait to hear more about that. Like I said, our purpose is here was
Yeah.
just to kind of give you an overview of how the conversation has evolved, and it really has. Sometimes people poke fun and say, "Hey, philosophy doesn't make progress." It seems like it genuinely has on this front.
Yeah.
The conversation really has evolved, and things have become more refined, and many new and important issues have been brought up because of the way that the problem of evil has been pursued or responded to. And we hope to, contribute a little something ourselves here.
Yeah.
So once those papers are done, you can bet your little behind that we'll be doing an episode or two on them as well. So
And if anyone wants the primitive inchoate version of this, right? Okay. There is that 2021 paper of mine that's out there.
it's not that primitive. I still think that's a great paper. Mhm.
And so if they want the basic argument, though, at that point, I'm not even making the failure, suffering
Right.
distinction, all that, but the basic argument is there.
Yeah.
The joke on the audience would be though is like, so this paper we're working on is going to be anthologized, right? So we will be unable to share this paper. Right?
I know.
So
We can share it with our mouths on the
we can
podcast.
talk about it, right? But if you ask us for a copy of it, we've
We can't
that's
do
a
it. Yeah.
contract saying we can't do it. So
Yeah, sorry guys, but you know what? But between your original paper and also I'm still a theodicy guy. Like I still think you can give a theodicy, which I do in my book. If they read both of those two things, and they could
yeah.
perhaps begin to predict. Really, what we're doing now together is just kind of refining and synthesizing and building upon these.
Or they could do our friends at Palgrave a solid and get the anthology.
Actually, buy some of the work, yeah, too. I think
Yeah,
it'd
and
be
if you look
good.
at the anthology, is really great. Like is it Michael Ty's in there, and one of Draper's students is in there, and there's some big people in there. So
Yeah,
it'll be worth
it'll
the
be
time.
pretty rocking. So we're looking forward to it. So thank you, Professor, for giving us that. That's what I love to do in this channel. Just kind of give the history of and the development of different philosophical ideas. And this is obviously a really big philosophical idea, right? The problem of evil.
Yeah.
It's ancient. It's still around. It's still lively today. So hopefully this was a good introduction for people. Again, that's all we're doing here, just trying to introduce what's going on. So many aspects of this debate that you can and should dive further into. So in the comments, hey, leave your thoughts. What do you think where do you think the debate is now? What do you think the strongest formulation is? And what do you think the best responses are? Get to chatting in the comments below. Be curious to hear what all of you think, and grab Jim's book, Thinking About Thinking. It's on Amazon. I'll put the links below. We appreciate all of your support. We'll catch you guys next time. See you later.